Our topic this evening is climate change, a public health emergency, and an unprecedented opportunity to create a healthy future for all. We will be learning about the important topic of public health and how it's affected by climate change. I am Andrea Hobley. I am the Vice President of the League of Women Voters of the Woodbury Cottage Grove area. Before we start, I want to share some information about the League. The League of Women Voters is a national organization with state and local leagues all over the country. Our mission is empowering voters and defending democracy. We envision a democracy where every person has the desire, the right, and the knowledge and the confidence to participate. I also want to share our nonpartisan policy because it's very important to our organization. The League is nonpartisan, neither supporting nor opposing candidates or political parties at any level of government, but always working on vital issues of concern to members and the public. I want to thank you, our audience, for joining us tonight, and also our guest presenters, Kristin, Raab, and Lynne Markus, for their expertise and willingness to share with us this evening. This program is a reflection of our League's environmental priority on this vitally important topic. Next, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Jody Ritaka. She is the host and producer of the Emmy Award-winning Minnesota cable TV show, Inside Healthcare. Ms. Ritaka is also the Public Relations Director for the League of Women Voters, Woodbury Cottage Grove area. Thank you, Jody.
Thank you so much, Andrea, and welcome everyone. And it is my pleasure to introduce Kristin. Raab is the Director of the Minnesota Climate and Health Program at the Minnesota Department of Health, and she has 20 years of experience in public health and holds master's degrees in public health, epidemiology, and landscape agriculture. Architecture. As part of the initial cohort of the Center for Disease Control and Prevention Climate Ready States and Cities Initiative, her program piloted and helped refine the Building Resilience Against Climate Effects framework, producing innovative climate and health products and the first vulnerability assessment describing the health impacts of climate change in Minnesota. In 2017, Ms. Raab received the Harvey G. Rogers Memorial Award from the Minnesota Public Health Association for her dedication to raising awareness of the health impacts of climate change. Well, welcome to have Ms. Raab with us. And then also is Lynne Markus, co-leader of the League of Women Voters Woodbury Cottage Grove Area Environmental Committee and a member of the League of Women Voters Minnesota Climate Change Task Force, and has been active in many capabilities during her 30+ years with the League. She has a master's degree in political science and public administration. Ms. Markus oversaw the Minnesota Department of Health Climate Change Program in its early years. She also was active in the department's emergency preparedness and disaster response as part of her 43 years of experience in environmental and public health programs. Well, welcome to Lynne as well. So I will toss it to you now for your presentation, and then afterwards, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A, and we'll address your questions at the end of the presentation. So welcome, Kristin.
Great, thank you, Jody. I'm just going to pull up the presentation right now. I don't think you can see it yet. Let me just try again. All right, I think we're in business. Hi, everyone. I'm so pleased that you could join us today, especially on this gorgeous day. Again, I'm Kristin Raab.
And I'm Lynne Markus.
And we're very excited to talk with you today about the health impacts of climate change as one of the greatest human threats of our time, but also one of the greatest opportunities we have to improve health and create a better future for all of us. To begin, we'd like to start with a very important land acknowledgement. We are living on the ancestral lands of the Dakota people. We want to acknowledge the Dakota, Ojibwe, the Ho-Chunk, and the other nations of the people who also called this place home. We pay respect to their elders, past and present, and take this moment to consider the treaties made by tribal nations that entitled non-Native people to live and work on traditional Native lands. It is important for us to remember the legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us here today on this land. Let us continue to share and discuss these truths as we recognize and grapple with our difficult past and move forward in addressing the many challenges that lie in front of us. So as an overview of our presentation today, we're going to begin with climate changes in Minnesota and how these changes directly and indirectly impact health. We'll be talking about air pollution, extreme heat, flooding and drought, ecosystem threats, and mental health. Climate change impacts all of us, but some people are disproportionately impacted. So we're also going to touch on climate equity as a way of protecting everyone's health. Then we're going to transition into what the state is doing and what we can all do individually and collectively to shape a better future. And at the end, Lynne is going to say a few words about how the League of Women Voters supports people to improve our climate, the environment, and equity. And finally, we should have some time for questions at the end. So sometimes people do not understand how climate change and personal health are linked. After all, climate change has been associated with melting ice caps and polar bears in the Arctic, and not with a visit to your very own physician here in Minnesota for an asthma attack. This is a great graphic that visually connects something so abstract as rising greenhouse gas emissions with climate change threats. Starting at the top, the rise in greenhouse gases is leading to increased temperatures and changes in precipitation. Minnesota's temperature has warmed 3 degrees Fahrenheit between 1895 and 2020, and annual precipitation has increased by 3.4 inches. But average increases do not tell us the full story. Rain is falling more frequently in heavy, extreme, localized events, so that some part of our state is experiencing flooding, while other parts of our state are experiencing drought. In fact, several counties in Minnesota have had both a disaster declaration for flooding by FEMA and a disaster declaration for drought by the USDA in the same year. So these changes in our atmosphere are disrupting our air quality, weather patterns, water cycles, and ecosystems, which in turn are leading to more air pollution, extreme heat, flooding and drought, and ecosystem threats. Many of these changes are happening right now, but all of these changes will impact the health of people, and all of these impacts will most likely increase. All of these things that we call climate hazards, so air pollution, extreme heat, flooding and droughts, and ecosystem threats, are associated with a wide range of health impacts. Some of these climate hazards cause direct health effects, so like a heat-related illness from a heat wave, and some cause indirect health effects, like exacerbation of asthma from mold growth in a flooded basement. So we know this is a lot of information to digest, but we're going to do our best to walk through many of these impacts over the next slides. So starting with air pollution. Increases in air pollution can result directly from greenhouse gas emissions, but also from the effect of rising temperatures on the formation and release of pollutants. In Minnesota, ozone, particulate matter, and allergens are the air contaminants that we're most concerned about with climate change. These pollutants can have direct health effects, such as causing or exacerbating cardiovascular and respiratory diseases, including chronic obstructive pulmonary disease or COPD, allergies, and asthma. Indirect health effects from air pollution can include reduced visibility on a high smog day, reduced productivity at work or school due to allergies or asthma, and reduced productivity and degradation of crops and water sources, which can lead to economic burdens. So who's most at risk? Well, children, because they have developing lungs, they're outside more and they play vigorously and inhale more air per pound of body weight compared to adults. Adults over 60, because their bodies are aging. people with chronic respiratory or cardiovascular diseases because they are more susceptible to air pollution, individuals living near other sources of air pollution, such as roadways or freeways or heavy industry, and that's because they're chronically exposed to air pollution. And then people of color, because they are more likely to be exposed to more air pollution and have a disproportionate burden of heart and lung diseases, which can increase susceptibility. So just in case you don't know what ground level ozone and particulate matter are, I'm going to just provide a really brief description. So ground level ozone is a gas that is not emitted directly from emission sources. It's formed through a chemical reaction in the environment. Ozone pollution levels tend to rise on very hot and sunny days with little wind. The sun and heat increase the speed at which this chemical reaction occurs, causing ozone pollution levels to increase. Due to the nature of this reaction, the highest ozone levels tend to occur downwind of the urban core. Particulate matter is small pieces of airborne particles, including dirt, dust, soot, smoke, and liquid droplets. Some particles are so small that they can be inhaled deep into the lungs and even enter the bloodstream. On this slide, you can see an average grain of table salt magnified relative to a particle that is 10 microns and one that is 2.5 microns. It is these very small particles that we're most worried about when it comes to health. Fine particulate pollution can be elevated at any time of the year, but in Minnesota, the highest levels are typically measured between November and March, although this could be changing. In general, we breathe clean air in Minnesota according to federal standards. But on some days and in some locations, our air is unhealthy due to ozone or fine particulate matter. And climate change is threatening to make these unhealthy air days more frequent and more intense. As a good example, you may remember the unprecedented air quality event we had in August. The event was triggered from smoke, including particulate matter 2.5, from massive fires burning in Canada. The map on this slide shows the maximum observed 24-hour air quality index, or AQI category. The air quality index creates a standard number to show the health impacts of air pollutants. The Minnesota Pollution Control Agency issues air quality alerts for AQI values 101 and higher. So 101 to 150 AQI translates to the orange category in the chart, meaning the air is unhealthy for sensitive groups. Larger AQI numbers are associated with greater health risks. Well, this was the second time a statewide air quality alert had been issued in Minnesota. And the first one was in 2018. It was the first time a multi-day air quality alert was issued statewide. It was also the longest duration of an air quality alert, 8 days. And it was the first time in Minnesota where the daily AQI reached the purple level, or over 200, meaning that the air quality was unhealthy for everyone, not just those that might be more sensitive to poor air quality. Some places saw an hourly concentration of over 400, the highest AQI level, including St. Cloud at 422 and Brainerd at 401. The number one thing you can do to protect yourself and your family from poor air quality is to stay informed. So you can sign up for the air quality notification, or Air Now, to get current conditions for Minnesota's air quality, or you can download the Minnesota Air mobile app. The second thing you can do is avoid exposure to poor air quality by limiting your time outdoors or taking it easy if you must be outside. Other things you can do include keeping your indoor air as clean as possible by using an air cleaner, avoid increasing indoor air pollution by not smoking or frying foods. People with asthma or other breathing conditions should make sure that they have a rescue inhaler with them, and you should have a plan, talk to your doctor, and have a plan for handling those poor air quality events. An N95 mask, if worn properly and properly fitted, can offer you some protection outdoors. Always talk to a doctor if you're having trouble breathing or if your conditions worsen. Another impact on the air we breathe is that's intensifying with climate change is pollen. There are 3 pollen seasons in Minnesota: trees, grasses, and weeds. Trees are the first to release pollen, typically starting in April. Grasses usually ramp up pollen release in early June, and weeds typically begin releasing pollen in mid-June and continue into the first hard frost. Not only do we have 3 pollen seasons to deal with, yay for allergy sufferers like myself, but research has shown that the growing season for ragweed pollen, which is highly allergenic, has increased by 15 to 25 days in and around Minnesota. The lengthening pollen season is strongly related to climate change characteristics, such as the lengthening of our frost-free season, and then the later timing of the first fall frost.
Who is the allergy culprit? Can you tell? One is ragweed, the other is goldenrod, and one of these plants is innocent of causing allergies. Why, you might ask? Well, pollen allergies are caused by wind-blown clouds of pollen from tiny flowers. The plant that shows more showy blooms attracts the pollinators to it, so they can gather the pollen instead of relying upon wind distribution of pollen. Because goldenrod blooms about the same time as ragweed, it is often wrongly identified as a problem and unfairly removed. Goldenrod is needed for pollinators and for biodiversity in a sustainable ecosystem. The ragweed is on the right, and it has leaves that are more finely cut than the goldenrod on the left.
So when we think of extreme weather in Minnesota, we tend to think of floods or tornadoes, but we have extreme heat events here as well. Higher heat, increased humidity, and longer and more frequent extreme heat events can lead to dehydration and heat stroke. Untreated heat stroke can lead to death. Heat can also worsen existing health conditions, such as various respiratory and cardiovascular diseases. People most at risk are people who are more exposed, including outdoor workers, so people that work in agriculture and construction, student athletes, people who live in the cities due to the heat island effect, and people without air conditioning and unhoused persons. And people can be at a higher risk also because they are more susceptible for physiological reasons. So this includes people with underlying medical conditions, pregnant women, older adults, infants, and young children. Just as one example of the devastating effects of heat, in the summer of 2011, we had 6 days when the heat index was 105 degrees or higher. And that same summer, we had 1,302 emergency department visits and 3 deaths due to heat. What makes these numbers tragic is that heat-related illnesses and deaths are completely preventable. From 2000 to 2019, there were 63 deaths in Minnesota due to heat. This chart shows emergency department visits by age groups. Although the number and rate of visits change every year, so year to year, trends show that the group that most frequently ends up in the emergency department due to heat is 15 to 34-year-olds. And then next is adults 65 and older. These 2 groups consistently have higher rates of heat-related emergency department visits than any other age group. So there are many things you can do to prevent heat-related illness. The key is to stay cool, hydrated, and informed. So drink water, fluids frequently throughout the day, take a cold shower to cool off, limit outdoor activities, and if outside, take frequent breaks in the shade and drink plenty of water. Wear light-colored and lightweight clothing, as well as a hat to protect you from the sun. Definitely avoid alcohol and caffeine when you're hot. You can also help others stay safe in extreme heat. So check on children, people ages 15 to 34 years old, we just talked about them, and the elderly for signs or symptoms of heat-related illness. The health department has a really nice graphic of telling the difference between heat exhaustion and heat stroke, and you can find that link on the slide. Also, check in with family or neighbors who might be more at risk. So especially those who live alone or have chronic health conditions like diabetes or high blood pressure or kidney disorders, which those diseases can be made worse by heat exposure. Also, MDH developed an extreme heat toolkit that can help organizations and local governments plan for extreme heat events. And that too can be found on the link on the slide. So increased frequency and severity of heavy rainfalls can lead to flooding, which has a number of health impacts like injury or death from drowning, illnesses from being exposed to contaminated drinking water or recreational sources, mental health stress from experiencing the trauma of the event or later from being displaced or dealing with a damaged home or business, respiratory ailments from exposure to mold from flooded basements, or carbon monoxide poisoning from exposure to carbon monoxide when using secondary power sources like generators. Flooding can also disrupt economic and social networks and put a strain on essential services. People most at risk are people who are more likely to be exposed to floodwaters, like those who are living in a floodplain or near a water body, or people who cannot easily evacuate or recover from flooding destruction, such as people who do not have reliable transportation, people who can't use stairs when an elevator is out of service, people in wheelchairs, people with disabilities, older adults, and lower income people. What does flooding look like? You may have experienced this already. Heavy rains can cause standing water where we don't want it, like in our backyards or basements. Many homeowners have experienced wet basements, which is mentally and financially stressful. And if mold starts to grow, that becomes even more of a health concern. Localized flash flooding can also be a problem where our infrastructure is undersized and people get caught off guard by roads that have become like rivers. This is an important public health safety concern, as almost half of flash flood fatalities occur in vehicles. Many just don't realize how little water it takes to pose a safety risk. It takes as little as 6 inches of fast-moving water to knock over and carry away an adult, and as little as 12 inches can carry away a small car. Always avoid driving through submerged parts of roads. They say, turn around, don't drown. Another public health concern we have with the precipitation changes caused by climate change is waterborne disease outbreaks. This diagram illustrates how heavy downpours can lead to a host of problems, including increased runoff and sewage overflows, which can then cause outbreaks of waterborne diseases such as E. coli and cryptosporidium. Runoff can also carry those viruses and other disease-causing agents into wells and recreational water, contaminating them and then causing health problems. So there are a number of things you can do before, during, and after a flood to keep your family safe. And a few resources are listed on the slide. Most importantly, you want to talk with your family about what you need to do and make a plan to be prepared if a flood watch or warning is issued. Also, make sure you stay informed about local conditions. And one way to do that is to sign up for alerts. Having a battery-powered or hand-cranked radio to listen to NOAA radio broadcasts can also be useful, especially if you don't have power or you aren't able to use your phone. Find out if you're located in a floodplain, and if so, you should look into flooding insurance. And don't forget about your pets. If it's not safe for you to stay in your home during an emergency, it's probably not safe for them either. Make sure you have a plan for their safety too.
Regarding plans, I'm happy to say that our local South Washington Watershed District identified climate change as a top priority and produced a 2018 climate resilience plan. I know they're planning to update it in the next year or so. I think this next year. It engaged citizens, local governments, and stakeholders in the watershed management planning process. In a series of workshops, participants listed climate hazards, who and what is at risk in their community, and prioritized needs regarding actions on groundwater, natural resources, stormwater infrastructure, and implementation strategies. The watershed districts summarized this information for each community to use in its own comprehensive plan to reduce risk through building climate resiliency. You may view this plan online to think about your community and what you might want. The link is on the bottom of this slide, and it's listed in our resources slide at the end of this program.
Excellent. So increases in temperature and changes in rain patterns are disrupting and changing our ecosystems, which can affect the spread of diseases caused by insects, ticks, and rodents, and can increase harmful algal blooms. So diseases from ticks in Minnesota include Lyme disease, anaplasmosis, and babiosis. Diseases from mosquitoes include West Nile virus and La Crosse encephalitis. Harmful algal blooms can cause various liver, respiratory, and nervous system or skin disorders. Indirect health effects from ecosystem threats include financial strains or threats to livelihoods that are based on recreational dependent economies like camping, fishing, and hunting. People most at risk for diseases carried by insects, ticks, and rodents are people who are more exposed, meaning they spend more time outdoors where all these critters live. This map shows the expanding geography and increasing incidence of Lyme disease cases in Minnesota. As you can see, from 1996 to 2013, there is a definite shift westward in the state. In 2018, we had almost 1,000 confirmed Lyme disease cases and over 500 probable cases. And that is a physician diagnosed case that did not meet clinical evidence criteria for a confirmed case, but had laboratory evidence of infection. So examining tick-borne disease risk specifically, with increases in temperatures, ticks will become active sooner, they'll stay active longer, allowing more time to develop and feed on hosts. There may also be a decreased die-off over the winter months if temperatures do not get very cold. An increase in temperature can also lead to new tick species moving into and surviving in Minnesota, which could lead to the introduction of new diseases. Ticks really like humidity, so with increased precipitation, this may also aid tick survivability in the summer and extend their feeding times each day. So those teeny bites can have a really big impact, and ticks are a concern for anyone who likes to be outside. MDH has some great resources, including short videos to learn more. And then there are things you can do to prevent tick bites, such as wearing insect repellent, doing a tick check after being outdoors, taking a shower, which helps wash off the ticks before they become attached to your skin. And you can also become aware of Lyme disease symptoms so that if you do get bitten, you can see a doctor right away and get treatment. So an increase in water temperature can also lead to blue-green algal blooms, which contain toxins that can pose harmful health risks. People or pets who drink or swim in water with dangerous levels of harmful algal bloom contamination may experience stomach illness, skin irritation, allergic responses, and damage to the liver and nervous system. In extreme cases, dogs and other animals have died from drinking water contaminated with these toxins. Harmful algal blooms in Minnesota lakes result from a number of factors, including runoff from fertilizers, discharges from wastewater treatment plants, warmer waters, and higher temperatures. While harmful algal blooms can occur naturally, the frequency of outbreaks is increasing in part because of human activities that create favorable conditions for the blooms. When in doubt, stay out. So climate change also poses a number of threats to our mental health. Climate change can cause mental health impacts through the direct exposure to a climate-related disaster like flooding, through the disruption of a major determinant of health, such as a loss of livelihood or a cultural tradition, or through awareness or uncertainty of climate change as an existential threat. These experiences may overlap and lead to compounded impacts on an individual or even an entire community, such as family farmers burdened with decadal drought who are more likely to commit suicide. Existing research has associated several mental health conditions with climate change, such as psychological distress, grief reactions, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, interpersonal conflicts, drug or alcohol abuse, loss of identity, and suicide ideation. People most at risk include the youth. Youth are at increased risk for distress and anxiety in the aftermath of an extreme event. Women, they have a higher prevalence of post-traumatic disorder and other mental health disorders after disaster than men. Elderly tend to have higher rates of untreated depression and physical ailments that contribute to their overall vulnerability. Communities of color and immigrants, because of limited English because of social isolation related to language barriers that may inhibit their ability to prepare for or respond to and cope with climate changes and related disasters. Unhoused populations, a combination of risk factors make people who are experiencing homelessness more at risk to the negative impacts of climate change. Also, occupational exposure. Healthcare and public safety workers are at an increased risk for short-term and long-term mental health consequences. And lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and other identities may be at increased risk due to social stigmatization, harassment, and abuse. So talking about your feelings with others can help, or if needed, definitely seek professional assistance. MDH has created a discussion guide for parents and caregivers about how to talk with youth about climate change, and the link to this resource is on the slide. Also, the American Psychological Association published a summary of the impacts and responses to mental health in our changing climate. The link to these resources are also on the slide. Another great way to deal with the stress of climate change is to get involved in climate action. This can help build your own sense of resiliency and efficacy, and it can foster optimism, and it can connect you to others, which helps you dissipate feelings of that loneliness and hopelessness. The implications of our changing climate may seem pretty stark after a closer look at the realities we're facing. But we're not going to improve things with the doom and gloom outlook. We can flip the threat of climate change into an opportunity and all play a part in positive change. The Lancet, a well-respected medical journal, originally asserted that climate change was the biggest health threat, and it still is. But a few years later, the Lancet published a glass half full statement saying, tackling climate change could be the greatest global health opportunity of the 21st century. Now more than ever, we have an opportunity, a necessity really, to build resilience at all levels in the face of climate change. Our opportunity for feasible, tangible strategies to disrupt climate change and build resilience is twofold. Adaptation, which is about modifying how we do things to minimize or prevent negative impacts of climate change. This includes things like large-scale infrastructure changes, like improving how stormwater is managed locally to better capture water where it falls and prevent flooding. It also includes things like behavioral shifts, like taking protective steps during hot days or days with unhealthy air quality index. Mitigation encompasses activities that address the root cause of the issue, so focusing on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. These activities help slow a changing climate, and they work hand in hand with adaptation by reducing the likelihood of future negative impacts. This includes activities like shifting to more sustainable transportation options, like biking, walking, or using mass transit, or shifting to electric vehicles. This could also include things like changing energy codes to improve building energy efficiency standards, or transitioning to cleaner energy sources like solar. Both approaches are necessary because even if our emissions are dramatically decreased in the next decade, we'll still need to adapt to the global changes that are already in motion. With any of these opportunities, health equity must be an integral part of how the solutions are defined, created, and implemented. Health equity through the lens of climate change means making sure that the activities are beneficial for all people, especially populations that face health inequities. This brings me to a very important point about how to create a better future for all Minnesotans. That is, we must center our solutions on health equity. While we will all be impacted by climate change to some extent, we must acknowledge that climate change is this powerful risk amplifier, particularly in regards to health impacts. Climate change will disproportionately impact many of the communities that already experience health inequities or systemic differences in health status that are preventable and unfair. Inequities can be driven by racism, discrimination, income constraints, and pre-existing health conditions. Within Minnesota, inequities in living conditions, wealth, power, and health place Black, Indigenous, and people of color at greater risk of experiencing the negative health impacts of climate change. As we move forward, it's important to understand that equity doesn't mean equality in the solutions. Equality focuses on treating everyone the same, delving out the same solution for everyone regardless of their starting point. Equity, on the other hand, focuses on treating everyone fairly. An equitable system matches resources and supports with needs to facilitate the best outcome for all. It doesn't treat everyone equally regardless of their starting point. So as you embark on climate solutions, it's imperative that you're tailoring those solutions for the people in your community and what inequities and barriers they face in living that full and healthy life. A great place to start is by framing climate solutions using a set of guiding questions. These equity-focused questions can help integrate health equity into how the work is done and making sure the outcomes that you come up with are equitable. Building climate resilience communities means starting with the people who will be impacted first and worst. Unpacking the why behind vulnerability is an important exercise so you can truly understand how best to serve your community. Thinking about the people most impacted and putting them front and center in whatever work you decide upon can help ensure equitable strategies. Here's a starter list of questions that are meant to prompt discussion about climate and health equity. These questions get at the nuances behind that vulnerability and the vast opportunities that exist to reduce vulnerability while also strengthening community networks.
To sample the history of some vulnerable Minnesota communities, here are some examples of how racist policies have influenced today's environmental conditions. Systemic seizure of indigenous land occurred when Dakota and Ojibwa people were coerced into signing land cessation treaties beginning in 1805. Intentional exclusion of Black families became a form of systemic discrimination when the Homeowners Loan Corporation redlined areas in 1934. Infrastructure was prioritized over minority communities when the Federal Aid Highway Act in 1956 was followed by the completion of Interstate 35W in 1967 and Interstate 94 in 1968, displacing Black residents and businesses. And the consequences of racist policies persist. As an example, the Metropolitan Council researched tree canopy in neighborhoods and found that the lack of trees, or tree inequity, creates hotter neighborhoods. Here we see a graph of this research with high summer land surface temperature at the top of the vertical axis. The amount of green space increases along the right of the horizontal axis, as represented by the pictures of low, moderate, and high green space under the graph. The data points in the graph represent cities, 2 of which have arrows drawn from them pointing to satellite imagery of each city on the right of the graph. The warmer of the 2 cities, Minneapolis's Camden neighborhood, had 16% tree canopy, 46,508 as a median income, and 59% residents of color. 13.3 people lived in an acre on average, and the temperature was 97 degrees. The cooler of the 2 cities, St. Paul's Summit Hill, had 42% tree canopy, 118,625 median income, 9% residents of color, 13.2 people per acre, and a temperature of 94 degrees. To address these inequities, our Metropolitan Council developed Growing Shade, the name of a new free online app. Growing Shade has an environmental justice lens that allows residents and planners to identify areas and people that face disproportionately negative consequences of land use decisions. Growing Shade was created by Dr. Ellen Esch and Eric Wojcik of Metropolitan Council in partnership with the Nature Conservancy and Tree Trust. It is an interactive online mapping tool for residents and planners to make decisions about tree canopy. Wojcik states that when infrastructure is prioritized over human community life, such as the decision to build Interstate 94 through the heart of the vibrant African-American Rondo neighborhood, it lasts generations. It was important for our tool to consider our region's specific history in a focused way. So Growing Shade provides 4 lenses to apply to land: environmental justice, which are the purple areas on the map, show how the need for greening intersects with income, race, and ethnicity. The climate change lens is in yellow on the map. It reflects the need for trees to mitigate some consequences of climate change by cooling land surface temperatures and reducing flooding. Conservation of resources in blue displays the concern for reducing tree canopy loss critical to offset carbon emissions and conserve biodiversity across the region. And there's a public health lens in green, and it represents the need for trees to improve air quality and cool land temperatures, leading to better health outcomes. Demographic information about neighborhoods, locations of businesses, schools, bus stops, parks, and other data are combined to create a complete picture of a city down at the neighborhood level. We are viewing a very general map here based on the highest priority needs over large areas. But this map is highly customizable. A neighborhood level map with different priorities set for each of these lenses based on a community's specific needs can produce a different colored display. For example, the public health lens can identify higher asthma rates near schools, where trees could be planted to reduce air particulates. Planners using this tool can consider if they are asking the right health equity questions, as Kristin discussed earlier. And people challenged by disparities may use this free tool to communicate and to plan built areas and natural habitats to create a climate-resistant community. The online link is listed in our resources slide, and we don't have time to go into more on this now.
Thanks, Lynn. Now let's transition into additional ways we can create a better future, starting with some of the work that the state is doing to mitigate and adapt to climate change. The Minnesota state government published a draft climate action framework. Over this winter and spring, several work groups met to discuss and revise the framework along with thousands of public comments that came in through a web-based platform. A revised framework will be released in mid to late September. The framework consists of 6 goals to help forward climate action in Minnesota. The 6 goals center around transportation, natural and working lands, communities, energy, health, and economy. There are many actions contained in the framework that are important for us to implement together to create a healthier and more equitable and sustainable future for Minnesota. I'm just going to list a few. So transitioning to 100% carbon-free electricity, increasing availability and access to electric vehicles and expanding electric vehicle charging infrastructure, protecting forest peatlands and grasslands to better manage carbon storage, developing resiliency financing mechanisms, advancing climate-smart housing codes, supporting public health infrastructure and ensuring access to affordable, culturally competent healthcare and mental health services, and transitioning to a clean economy and equitable jobs. If you want to learn more about climate change and health, check out our climate and health training module series. The 7 training modules cover the topics of climate and health 101, extreme heat events, agriculture and food security, water quality and quantity, air quality, well-being, and vector-borne diseases. Each topic contains a suite of materials, including a 1-hour webinar, a fully scripted PowerPoint presentation that you could give if you'd like to, and a 2-page summary sheet. And they're all available on our website, which you can find on the next page.
All of us, humans and other life, are vulnerable to climate changes, some more than others. Our built habitats and natural habitats are also vulnerable. But the good news is that positive actions are underway and you can help. We have the plans, the tools, and the partnerships that create opportunity to mitigate climate change and create more equitable communities. These resources are available to help you. Some of them are listed on this slide. Thank you. This slide shows the Minnesota Department of Health climate change website. And now I'd like to share with you a few more ways that you can take advantage of some positive opportunities suggested by the League of Women Voters. The League of Women Voters states that we are now in a climate health emergency, and it affects you. The League agrees that climate effects on health include extreme weather, flooding, extreme heat, and drought. The League believes government policies need to change. And you can take meaningful action. Move away from fossil fuels. Put a price on carbon emissions. Electrify buildings and vehicles. Vote. Get online information at vote411.org. You can go there and see what's going to be on your ballot. You can check your voter registration. You can find your polling place and find upcoming debates in your area, plus a lot more information. And I'm proud to say that our tech extraordinaire for this program tonight is one of the people who's working at League of Minnesota, on this 411 program. And more information is going to be on that site in the future. It's a great site. The next step is advocate. Contact your elected and agency officials. Engage in environmental planning that's done by our legislature, state agencies, cities, counties, townships, and watershed districts. You can also join the League of Women Voters. All genders are welcome members, not just females, and join other groups that are based on respectful dialogue and action. We need to educate, discuss positive actions, and review the resources we've listed with other folks. Keep in mind what Abraham Lincoln said, as the Braver Angels public interest group reminds us. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Through passion may be strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise with the occasion. So we lobby. Join with others to address this climate and public health emergency. One option is the League of Women Voters Minnesota Climate Change Task Force, and I've listed their email address. It's open to all League of Women Voter members. Right now we've got about 19 leagues that participate, but the website's open to the public, which can view a lot of resources. This group does nonpartisan work with the Minnesota Environmental Partnership to advocate and track legislation, and members of the public can view the online bill tracker on their website or on the League of Women Voters Climate Change Task Force webpage. Also on that webpage, you will find a list of many resources and events. So again, as Kristin mentioned earlier, one way to fight climate change is to work with other people. It keeps your spirits up. You're being effective when you're working with other people. So together, we have an unprecedented opportunity to create a healthy future for all. And it's time now for our moderator, Jody Ritaka, to take questions.
Thanks, Lynn. We have some questions coming in. So you indicated that the population over 60 have a higher risk for hazards of ground level ozone, yet the metro area senior housing is typically being located near freeways and where the residents are exposed to the traffic and ozone levels and stuff. Is there a situation being discussed in the Minnesota Department of Health and Climate Program about this, or what can be done to change this situation?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think if you have some specific concerns about your building being close to highways or other areas that have additional pollution, please reach out to us and we can talk about that. There's zoning policies that different cities and communities have where they try to ideally zone away from places that have high volumes of traffic or other issues. But we can definitely talk more about that and what could be done to sort of mitigate any health effects.
Thanks, Kristin. Another question. They recently learned that nitrates are at least as big a threat to our water as phosphorus, both being found in fertilizers. And there has been a big effort over several years to decrease or eliminate the use of the fertilizers with phosphorus. So is there a growing emphasis on decreasing nitrates in our fertilizers?
That's an excellent question, and I'm not sure I can answer that. I do know that there is a lot of concern about nitrate in our water. I think the Department of Agriculture regulates fertilizer and pesticides, so I'm not unfortunately up on what they are doing, but if you do contact me, I'd be happy to reach out to them and find out more information.
Oh, go ahead, Lynne.
I would also say that nitrogen, while it is a significant issue with agriculture, it's also an issue in our communities. And there are a number of community groups that work to encourage people to plant landscapes that do not need nitrogen. And all of us can see in our ponds green scum, and that comes from the nitrogen. And so if you pass a scummy body of water, maybe you want to have a gentle effective conversation about some land management practices with the people in that area. Again, some of it does come from upstream, and we do get water from outside of Woodbury. We're all guilty. We're all guilty. Everybody in agriculture and in our city and the cities above us that send water, we're all using unnecessary amounts of nitrogen. And the excess is what runs off into the water and creates our algal blooms. And so it's a public information issue that we just need to keep working with people on. And there are a number of organizations that have been working on that. If you want to contact League of Women Voters, we'd be happy to put you in touch with groups that are working on that.
Thanks, Lynn. Another question, with the ever expanding size of people, buildings, and roads in the outer suburbs, is there a growing shade initiative for those suburbs?
Well,
go ahead, Lynn.
in one case, Metropolitan Council does work with communities on growth. Communities are supposed to have comprehensive plans. We all have a 2040 comprehensive plan in the metro area that each city develops and sends to Met Council. And Met Council works with cities to talk about their growth and how it meets criteria for the entire region on many different things. I would suspect that they would be using this growing shade tool as they work with communities. And due to lack of time, I did not mention that we had a number of about 4 or 5 cities that are actually mentioned in the growing shade tool who have already used the tool to increase shade in their area. So this is one thing that you can ask your community about. You might want to check the resource in the website that we've given you to see how that might apply to some of your interests.
I just want to add that I believe the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency and the Department of Natural Resources, so DNR, also have grants and programs for tree planting. So I would encourage you to check out their websites because there might be funding available to help plant more trees in your community.
Thanks, Kristin. Another question, does the league support the proposed land bridge in the former Rondo area? And are there concerns that the bridge will trap hazardous pollutants that will be harmful for the residents?
That's a very important issue. It is something that I'm not aware that our league has addressed yet.
Another question. Go ahead.
But if that person who asked that question would like to head up a group within the league to address it, they'd be very welcome to work with us and to make some progress on it.
Good point, Lynn. You know, the mental health is with the extreme weather conditions and things like that, and you said that that youth, women, elderly, people of color are at a higher risk for suffering from mental health and stuff. Do we know anything more about why that would be and what can be done to help these populations?
Yeah, so the reasons can vary depending on the group that you're talking about. We don't know nearly enough or as much as we should know about the mental health impacts of climate change. We know that they exist, and there's been a lot of studies that have been done where there's been huge hurricanes and looking at the aftermath of those hurricanes and finding people with post-traumatic stress syndrome and other issues. But we're still kind of learning about this issue.
And you were talking about the conditions of the dehydration increasing and things like that. And I interviewed a doctor earlier this year, and he was saying in June that he was already seeing patients coming in with dehydration. And surprisingly, I think it's that age group that you had mentioned too, which I think people are surprised by that. What was it, 15 to 30 something? And why is that? And and what can be done to reduce that? And you said it is preventable.
Yeah, so we've done some studies to confirm, yes, indeed, it's those 15 to 35-year-olds. It also tends to be males. We do think it's because they're probably more likely to be outside, and they're probably more likely to be doing construction or working in landscaping or out running or doing whatever. So that's why we think that it's that age group. We're still doing more research, but we do think it's probably because they're just more active, and they're sometimes we all think we're invincible and we can just go out there and take it on, but clearly that's not the case, because those folks are coming in a lot more than some of the other age groups.
And I know we had some of those 100 days in June, but the doctor still was surprised that he was already seeing patients coming in with it already in early mid-June, I think it was, when I interviewed him.
Yeah, it's definitely the heat, like dehydration, extreme heat illnesses definitely tend to happen earlier in the season because people haven't acclimated yet. Once we're like end of the summer, people are a little bit more adjusted to the heat, so it's not usually as bad if we have spike temperatures. But that doesn't mean you can't have a heat-related illness even when it's August, if we get hot enough and people aren't cooling off or drinking enough water or taking breaks.
Alarming looking at those graphics too about Lyme disease and how that has increased so much over the last couple of years. And again, it's because of our extreme weather, right? I mean,
yeah, so what I didn't show was the most current map of Lyme disease,
even worse?
which, yes, it's worse. The health department likes to aggregate the years together so you can see the trend. So there isn't enough years to do the next map on that series of maps I showed. But if you go onto our website, you can see that the incidence has increased, and it's high risk in many more counties, in fact. And again, that's because ticks like it warmer and they like it more humid, and that's the kind of weather we're having. So I would expect that to continue, especially because our temperatures are actually warming more in the winter than they are in the summer. So those winters that used to like kill off all those bugs that tried to get into Minnesota but just can't because we're so cold, it's warming now. So they're able to get more of a foothold. So I do think that's going to change a lot in the future.
And the focus was talking about Minnesota and stuff, the conditions here and what we're seeing and what we're doing about it and the conditions that we're experiencing. But how is it for the region overall, outside of our state lines and things like that? How do we compare with other states in the region?
Minnesota is one of the fastest warming states. For good or for bad, some of us like warmer winters, but it's not good for some of these other diseases. But yeah, because we're further north than some of the other states, it's actually the northern part of the hemisphere that's warming faster. So I think you're going to be hearing from Kenny Blumenfeld at some point, but he'll show you a map where you can see that the temperature increases are happening much more rapidly in northern Minnesota than in southern Minnesota. There's kind of a gradation there.
Very interesting. Another question, well, I think it's more of a statement. The Woodbury City Council is set up to approve a new environmental stewardship strategic initiative in August or the end of this month. Feel free to send appreciation notes to the mayor and the city council members for the important new initiative. So again, that was more of a statement or a comment. Anything else that you would want to share about some of the things that we can prevent some of these health conditions and concerns? I know it's very broad and you went into a lot of detail, but anything else that you want to leave people with, things that they could be doing to prevent, some of these health concerns?
Yeah, well, one of the things that we've actually talked about is having a conversation with your physician or your healthcare provider about climate change, because they can tell you a lot more about what those health impacts are and what you can do personally to protect yourself or your family. I also would recommend getting involved, because it really is going to take all of us to sort of turn the curve on this. And we do have an opportunity to make our communities like more bikeable, more tree friendly. I mean, we have this great opportunity to reduce our health risks and make like greater cities and in greater suburbs. So, there is a lot of opportunity here if we engage and we participate. So I just encourage everyone to get involved. This is something we can solve, but we need to do it together.
Thanks, Kristin. And Lynne, final comments before we pass it back to Andrea then?
And I have nothing more to say.
Well, absolutely great information, you guys. So I will now toss it back to Andrea.
Thank you. And I want to thank all of you again for joining us this evening, our audience and also our presenters to learn about this vitally important topic. So a special thanks to our speakers, Kristin, Raab, and Lynne Markus, and our moderator, Jody Ritaka. And also I want to mention thank you to Mary Bread for taking care of the Zoom for us. Before everyone goes, I want to share some other upcoming events and updates from our league. First, I really want to encourage everyone to attend and share information about the candidate forums in September. We have several of them on the calendar this year. You can watch them through our local cable channel, that's Southwest Washington County Telecommunications Commission, or SWCTC, on local TV, or otherwise on their YouTube channel. I know that's a long name, so if you can't remember that, you can also get that information on our website, which is LVW for League of Women Voters, WCG for WoodburyCottageGrove.org. So it's LVWWCG.org. Our other big ask with the candidate forums is to please consider submitting questions to the forums. We really need your questions, because the forums rely on asking the questions that the public wants to know, to hear from our candidates. You can submit those questions in advance. We really appreciate having them in advance at that same website. I will say it again, it's LVW or LWVWCG.org. And then the last thing, for all of our members who are on here and, anyone else, we also still have a few volunteer spots open for the September 13th Cottage Grove and September 21st Newport forums for volunteering. You can also get in touch about that through the information on the website or in your newsletters. Two other events that I want you to be able to mark on your calendar. October 17th, we'll be having another webinar open to the public, and that'll be County Commissioner 101. This is following how much we learned from our program that we hosted last fall on School Board 101, and that is still available to watch on our YouTube channel if it's of interest to you. We don't have a registration link for that yet, but you can watch for that on our website or in our newsletter and our social media. And then the next date, in November, going out one more month, we're going to be hosting our sampler again this year. I'm looking forward to having that in person this year, hopefully, fingers crossed, which is, that's a great event for people who might be interested in joining the league to learn more about us. And also it's great for current members who just want to learn more about what we're doing. So again, likewise, you can look for more information on that on our website or in our newsletter coming out soon. So thank you again for coming, and hope everyone has a really wonderful evening. Thanks.